Thank you for choosing to spend your Saturday evening with me, and hope you have your beverage of choice and you are comfortably settled in. I have a big pot of peppermint tea here. I wish I could share it with you guys. If you were actually here, I'm going to pretend that you are. So let me share my screen. Okay, and the other thing that I want to acknowledge right away is that I recognize that most of you are or have been experiencing difficult things recently. There's been a lot of grief, helplessness, frustration, and worry. Let's take a moment to honor you for being here. Um, we remember to shower appreciation on others that we see as heroes. Let's also remember the courage that it takes to do the right thing every day, the bravery to choose hope and joy, the resilience to show up for ourselves. Let's honor the seemingly small things, your gestures, the elders or youngsters you might be taking care of right now, the friends you might be supporting, the moments that you choose to laugh. Even the sheer tenacity of showing up at the desk and getting on with your day or your work, whatever shape that takes for you. And even more wholeheartedly in that sentiment, thank you for sharing this evening with me. My name is Kriti Monga. The majority of my work is being a creative strategist and designer for brands. This picture was taken in my studio a few years ago. Um, I graduated in graphic design from NID in 2002. I worked at various companies and studios for about 8 years before I set up my own studio called Turmeric Design. I have drawn as far back as I can remember. I think my family or anybody around me does not remember a time that I did not draw. And I don't mean that in a way of skill alone. I mean that that drawing has always had some sort of a place for me in terms of um, maybe that was the channel to understand things for me. Um, of course, when you're a child, there are many different formats that drawing takes. For me, I had to write to learn my lessons. So I filled up a lot of notebooks. I wrote, I don't know if you could call it poetry. I taught myself to draw and paint. And as a little one, since we're talking about her, here she is. I grew up in the 1980s in New Delhi. This picture was taken in our family home in Khan Market. My mom is a scientist researcher. I spent many weekends at her science lab. My father was in the army, and I think my fondest childhood memories are his stories of all the battles that he was at. And in that mix, and this is the 80s, there wasn't the internet didn't exist. We barely watched TV. My childhood was filled with a steady supply of books and imagination. And I had two great addictions, reading and drawing. And I really mean addictions. I was a quiet kid. I wanted to hide away and do nothing else. I literally wanted to not care about sleeping, eating, or doing anything else. I had my own world in my head. When I was 12 years old, my life was uprooted by this massive accident that the entire family was in. And suddenly there was a lot that I didn't understand anymore. A lot of different things happened. And 4 years after that, I lost my father in another accident one morning. Um, and it was in those years that I think my relationship with my notebooks and diaries became cemented more than ever. Um, there was so much that I didn't understand about the world, about how ephemeral everything is, about death. Much like how I imagine times are right now for so many people. And I was fortunate to have the creative pursuits, the habits of making different things, dance, music, and writing and drawing as allies, almost to understand or to give shape to whatever I was thinking at that time. So, in that sentiment, there are five things that I thought that we could. It's a terrible joke that they all start with C. I'm really sorry, but I thought that we need nicer C words than we are seeing around us right now. So I've kind of divided up this entire presentation, if you call it that, into these ideas. Why do we draw? Why do we collect memories or thoughts in certain ways? Why do we collate them? Is it a form of catharsis? Of course it is. It is a form of comfort. And then how does drawing bring us clarity in our life, and particularly in my professional life? So let's talk for a while about curiosity. A lot of people ask me and anybody who draws if it's inborn. Um, I can see a few of you put your hands up if you've ever been asked that question. Everybody says, have you, is this inborn? Is this an inborn thing? I think the only thing I can legitimately lay claim to being born with is insatiable curiosity. And I really mean insatiable curiosity about the world outside of me and the world inside of me. I needed to ask questions all the time, and I needed to try things out all the time. And drawing and writing was a very good way to give shape to them. I went to NID in 1998, and I often say this and I mean it with all my heart. It saved my life. I think going to design school, finding community, finding the sense of purpose, and basically finding a place where there was suddenly so much to experience and learn, and so much richness about the world. Suddenly there was so much more possibility than I had experienced in my life the few years before NID. And even though I come from Delhi, I was born in Meerut in Army Hospital there, but I grew up all of those years in Delhi. Suddenly in Ahmedabad, meeting people from all over the country and spending time amongst them, my worldview started to open up in ways that I really consider amazing. Am I going to occasionally use my own drawings to narrate my story? Yes, I am. Stay curious. Ask questions about what doesn't make sense. Regain beginner's mind. So at NID in our first year, this is happening in 1998, there's this fabulous module called environmental perception. It doesn't have anything to do with the environment per se. It really means understanding your environment in a different way. And if I were to try to explain it to you in a sentence, it would be ways to immerse yourself and see better. And what happens is that we pack our bags and go off to a village. In our case, we went to this tribal village in Gujarat called Pejgar and spent, I think, about a week or 10 days there. You don't carry mobile phones, or of course, we didn't even have them at that time. But you basically only have your diaries to record things in. And there's an orientation to dress appropriately, to speak the language a little bit. I see one of my batchmates here. Hey, Sujo. And this, I think, in hindsight, I realized many years later, laid the foundations for how I travel and how I advocate traveling to other people. So these are some of the drawings from, guys, I was 17. Do not judge, but these are some of the drawings from that time, and you will see the kind of orientation of this course. It was really about observing things without prejudice, about, like I said, dressing appropriately, interacting with people in the village, fitting in, and really sort of trying to get an understanding of worlds that we had never experienced before, do not relate to. And even though this is in our own country, as grown-ups, I suppose we take this for granted. But even if you travel a few kilometers and really try to do this as a social experiment, you realize how important it is not just as communication designers, but as human beings, to understand different people for who they are and how they live their lives, and that everybody is different and everybody has their own beliefs. Um, and this was a postcard that was a class assignment. They gave out these blank postcards and asked us to draw anything and send home. This might just be my only drawing that my mom preserved. Um, Maybe I have one or two other diaries from my childhood. So I could talk forever about travel, but Pico Iyer has said everything, and I highly recommend a few pieces by him, particularly this essay called "Why We Travel." We travel initially to lose ourselves, and next to find ourselves. We travel to open our hearts and eyes and learn more about the world than our newspapers will accommodate. We travel to bring what little we can in our ignorance and knowledge to those parts of the globe whose riches are differently dispersed. And we travel, in essence, to become young fools again, to slow time down and take in and get taken in and fall in love once more. And this is the form of travel that I became very curious about as I started to explore different places. Um, a lot of my diaries are set in Indian cities, a lot, but many more are set in foreign places. And I think that this is something that I didn't think about it while it was happening, or has been happening. Um, but I think that there is this fascination with completely foreign places with completely different languages that one does not understand, that allows you to be completely outside of your own comfort zone, completely outside your skin. I have been couch surfing, if you're familiar with what couch surfing used to be. Um, in cities in times when we did not carry cell phones, um, or and in countries where I did not know the language and I've traveled solo. And that's the kind of travel that I advocate. Um, and so as soon as I could afford it, I started to backpack. I would book my tickets to a particular city and back from another city about 4 or 5 weeks later, and plan nothing in the middle. And I didn't come upon this overnight. I started to learn different things from travelers as I traveled. And I started to streamline what I enjoy for myself. And for me, it's about carrying as few belongings as possible, being as much on the move as possible, and obviously, always, no matter what happens, travel with a diary. And so the diary becomes a constant companion. And typically by day 4 or 5, I describe this as waking up and feeling like I could be whoever I want to be that day. And secondly, becoming in complete flow in terms of drawing or writing in my diary. A lot of people ask me this question, so I'm going to put it out there right away. This is the basic toolkit. There's no formula at all. It's a complete stream of consciousness recording of things that are happening around me, and things that I'm excited by or influenced by in different ways. So it's really whatever calls to me in that moment, whatever happens to be around me as tools. Sometimes there are trends that you will see in some of the cities as I start to use certain techniques or tools, but I think it's not thought about. It's not something that I use my front brain for. It's really very, very intuitive. So when I was telling you about Pico Iyer, there's the second essay that I highly recommend is called The Shock of Arrival. He says, no drug I can imagine, few love affairs I can dream of, can match that simple, shocking excitement of arriving in a truly foreign place. It is akin to the first kiss, the first date, all the firsts that have an intensity in life disproportionate to their duration. The first moment is worth 1,000 others. And every backpacker, particularly who has a penchant for landing up alone in weird times of day in completely foreign countries and streets will attest to this fact that the amount of terror and excitement and this tingling sort of openness that you feel about the things that you could be learning from this place are magnificent. And the only country that I have so far been to where this feeling never goes away is Japan. It's amazing how it continues to excite you all the time. For me, I find my fascination ignited by art and history, and the poetry sometimes of ordinary things, which is a complete contrast to the museums, but it's really where I find myself drawn to all the time. I tend to spend a lot of time in museums. And very early on, when I started traveling, there were museums that would prohibit photography, and that was fantastic because I would just sit and draw. And there is probably some sort of a record of the number of museums I've been firmly pushed out of because it's closing time. So there are of course a lot of ruminations in my diaries about the kind of about what travel means, about what perfect speed is. This is a beautiful quote from Jonathan Livingston Seagull. The Uffizi Museum in Florence. And so you see how what these look like. They're really, I'm not self-conscious in these books at all. I'm not, I don't care about mistakes or technique or anything. It's really about um, trying to feel like I'm capturing an essence of that moment and hold it with me and take it back home with me. There's this, I don't know if you've ever drawn in a museum, particularly when you are in front of an artist that you admire. It's not very different from a prayer. It feels very like a very sublime connection between the artist's work and you in that moment learning from them across time. I highly recommend it. It doesn't matter how you think your skills are or not. By the way, museums were made for that. Museums were made as places of study before they were made as places of vanity. It's really a form of reverence. You sit there and you just feel like the crowd and everything else falls away, and you're just in connection with the piece of work or and the artist. And there's so much that you're absorbing. So I, like I said, I don't plan a lot of things, and even when I do plan them, I'm very open to changing my plans depending on what people recommend or who I happen to be hanging out with, or maybe I just took a walk down a particular street. And so my senses are always so wide open that I'm always reading, I'm always listening to different things. I often have playlists for different cities or countries. I'm listening to music that belongs to those places. And so when I'm absorbing all of this, there's this level of, I think it's a sort of an intellectual and emotional openness that just feels really sublime. And it almost feels like I'm compelled to record the stuff that I'm learning at that time or thinking about. And so very often there are different scenes or points of view or information and emotion that sort of start coming together, and I'm not thinking while I'm drawing them, but when I come back from these places, I suddenly start to feel that moment very intensely and start to realize and recognize what happened. So it also becomes very self-revelatory because it's almost like you're seeing your own thoughts from another point of view that you didn't think about before. This is in Picasso Museum in Barcelona. I think I'm bitching about tourists and the sound of their heels. Um, so cities, I really found are my thing for some reason. It seems very touristy at the face of it. And you might be the sort of traveler who's fascinated by climbing mountains. You might be very taken by the forest, as am I. One of my poetry heroes, Mary Oliver, talks a lot about, in fact, she took a lot of walks in the wild almost as a means to deal with her difficult childhood. And I often think about how cities are like those forests for me. They're very rich, they're very alive. Um, I find myself returning to the bustle of large cities and finding my way through them. I feel like there's this organic living entity, and there are so many different aspects that um, I could just take completely different roads on different days. I could spend time with people, engage with objects, um, sit next to a river. There's just all of this sort of lushness to choose from. And I really feel like cities are not fixed. I don't see them like checklists. I really feel like they are living history, and I just happen to enter at a particular moment in that flow. And because so little is planned, it's almost like um, every great thing that happens feels like this great revelation. It feels like I've discovered it, or that this must be some sort of providence that I have found myself in this amazing spot at this amazing time. I don't know whether it's something that I feel, or I am a fortunate fool. I'm extremely, extremely lucky. I call it traveler's luck, um, or traveler's karma, in fact. um, and I feel like I just constantly keep being shown how magical the world is, and how amazing people truly are, and how wonderful strangers are, and how wonderful things happen. It's like I said earlier, right? Like when you start backpacking, particularly alone in cities, and when you've grown up in a city like Delhi, there's terror. There's abject terror about so many different things. And in those moments when you've let yourself loose to the wind, when you end up finding your own wisdom or a stranger's help or just sheer luck, it just feels like godsend. It feels like you can trust in the world again. And again, in hindsight, I think I really needed that. I think I seek that um, every time that I travel. And I keep finding it. I have to report. Like I just 9.5 times out of 10, I can't recall bad experiences. I think there's just been so much magic. And a lot of these drawings remind me of those moments. The one on the left, for example, I was painting this while the sun was quickly going down. I could barely see my painting, and there was a woman standing next to me chatting. When you're traveling by yourself, especially when you draw, there's so many people that you strike up amazing conversations with. And it's interesting how sometimes the most honest conversations happen with complete strangers. Like no names are exchanged, you barely speak 5 sentences, but they are the most honest things that you have said all month, all year, perhaps. And so much luck happens. Like in fact, that was the woman. She then said she happens to have this rare ticket to this wonderful concert that I ended up going to with her, and it was amazing. I have another painting of it later that I'll share with you. This was a this was a beautiful monsoon night. I think my notebook was flying in the wind. The staff at this hotel were trying desperately to get water out of it. Um, there's this one actually reminds me of this time in Sri Lanka. I don't have a very good drawing of it, even if I do. But there was this one time that I was stuck in the middle of a forest in a car with my mom. We put off the light and we were surrounded by fireflies. So there are these moments that are completely crazy, and in that time, all that you want to do is just pull out a notebook and somehow write it down or put it down. This was while wine tasting in a vineyard near Florence. And you can see what I was saying about materials. It's really very, very whimsical. Um, And over the years, I've discovered or almost created ways that I like to draw because I've found myself doing it first. It wasn't a thought before that I'm going to paint this like this or draw it like that, or explore this material in this particular way, but it ends up sort of guiding me forward. I really, really miss drawing outdoors. I'm frustratingly, I'm not going to say bad because it sounds like I'm sort of asking for compliments, but I'm really frustrated with my skills with nature drawing and cities particularly. But I'm glad that I can kind of capture them for myself, and draw while I'm walking around the place. This was in Shimla a couple of years ago, and this drawing immediately makes me feel the chill in the air that was there that time. It started to snow a few minutes later outside that window. I think you can see it in my drawing. And there's so much poetry of ordinary things. The woman who stays in this house, who owns this place, was full of so many stories of all of these objects. What came from her grandfather and what came from where, and it was really, really nice to just spend time in them, amongst them. So that's the other thing. I think being in the moment um, becomes very heightened. Somebody once said this to me, which I think is very true, that there are some of these pursuits, typically the ones that you think of as restful or relaxing, like reading or drawing, that have to happen at the speed of time. You can't rush them up. And somehow the the that time becomes um, just, I don't know. I mean, I think that the closest word to it is meditative, but it's not the right word. You're very, very sharply present where you are in that time while you're drawing something, because all that exists in your eyes and in your mind at that time is this object and that texture and that light and that feeling. Um, and it becomes extremely heightened. Um, and it becomes an addiction after that. You can't stop noticing things in the way. And this is where I also remember, I think of Mary Oliver. She talks about, when she writes her poetry about different plants and animals, and the forest and the wind, etc. She talks about bringing your attention to something, and how the gift of attention is the biggest gift to somebody. And I feel like it's a two-way gift. I feel like you bring your attention to these things that are around you while you're a complete stranger passing through, and it's fulfilling for both people. So this is all the curiosity about languages. I'm lucky to pick up different languages quite easily, and over a period of time I've started to challenge myself almost to um, at the end of a trip, I would write down all of the words that I can remember. And at one point, I realized that most of them were food words, because food words are so easy to pick up. And so I would challenge myself to write down non-food words. So this one, I think, was in Mexico when I was sitting down and trying to remember all the Spanish that I had picked up. And invariably, speaking of these, invariably I have very sharp thoughts about memories of the first words or the first phrases. And I feel like the first words that you learn in a city are very, in a completely foreign city, are very telling of what that place is about. And then I start to have these favorites that I pick up and start using very often, etc. And it's just amazing to wear those shoes for a while. If you can read Bangla, do not judge me. I was trying to copy Rabindranath Tagore's amazing handwriting. This was this amazing calligraphy class that I was fortunate to be a part of in Japan, and it was amazing not only because calligraphy in Japan is amazing, but because it was in the middle of this Zen Buddhist shrine. And our calligraphy teacher spoke mostly about the mountains and the rice fields and the wind, and really, really brought us into the moment, which is really how calligraphy is practiced. It's very, very zen. And you have very little control of the brush as compared to Western calligraphy, where you have this angle and that posture, etc. In Japan, it's a lot about letting go, and what you draw quite literally depicts that moment in time. That's how they are in Japan. So this was really quite an amazing trip. So complete strangers, right? Either seeing them from a distance, engaging with them. When you're traveling alone with a notebook, like I said, very often people will strike up conversations. Very often you will suddenly realize that you don't speak the same language, or they will have an observation about something that you didn't think about. And they become such amazing memories um, of that place and that moment. This was Matteo, who was one of the servers at this restaurant. It was his part-time job. And he helped me curate this wonderful meal at this Tuscan restaurant that I was in. I met Estefania on a train. We had the most amazing conversation. Joe was my couchsurfing host in Barcelona. He has this home music studio, and he always looks like that. He sulks a lot. So sometimes there are faces that you want to draw, and sometimes you just happen to draw something and you can see the picture on the right. This happens all the time, these conversations that suddenly get struck up, and people just become so enchanted by the fact that you are drawing them or drawing other people. The reason that this drawing has enjoy written on it is because that's probably the only English word Take-chan knows, and he uses it very often. Take-chan is Japanese. He's an artist who is a wonderful guy, and he's an artist who makes these driftwood sculptures, the one that you can see on the right hand side. Such a fun guy. This is Andrea, my friend in Italy. This is a recent wedding diary. So the drawing on the left, I actually drew that while the wedding was going on. Um, some people think it's antisocial, but I think I'm more present than ever when I'm drawing. And food. I have this great amount of fascination with food, and I'm fortunate to be, sorry if this picture makes you squeamish, but I'm fortunate to have been born with very little things that make me squeamish, and I'm very curious to try and challenge them at all times. So again, food for me is a way of understanding people and cities better and being curious about them. And because I tend to travel on low budgets on purpose, I actually have a daily budget, and I try and find living and eating situations that are as, for the lack of a better word, local and organic as possible. And I don't mean organic as an organic food, but spontaneous. I don't end up going to big restaurants, etc. I end up spending a lot of time in supermarkets and making food myself or eating in friends or new friends' homes. And so food becomes that sort of and obviously we have to talk about dessert first. The drawing on the left is a documentation of all the flavors of gelato that I ate in Italy. It was a big splurge. And obviously every tea and coffee shop has to be documented with equal love. This is a really old drawing. And so food is so many different things, right? Food is nostalgia. Um, it's different things that you might remember or associate events with. The image on the right has actual spills from the sauces and something else, I think, that we were eating that evening. This was in Annecy. And food is celebration. And whether it's food that you're eating when you're celebrating something or food itself that feels like a celebration. And obviously, I wasn't born with knowing everything about all kinds of food, and so it's a way to learn and to explore the way different people eat. The one on the left is a moment with a friend. The one on the right is a really nice lunch that I was invited to by Joe, my couch surfing host's mother. So it's like those amazing surprises. And like I was saying, I could speak about them forever. The people that you meet and the things that they offer you and how they invite you into their homes and their lives is truly astounding. It just makes you have so much more faith in the world. And just these words start to feel so much, right? That's all the wine we drank. And the drawing on the right, I don't know if you can see it anymore. It's kind of faded, but I actually tried to paint with the wine. This was this lovely breakfast in Suryagar. I didn't have a notebook with me. I think I was drawing on some random piece of paper. And I do really enjoy drawing while eating. I know, like, there's often people who say your food is going cold, or, you know, what are you doing, or whatever. But I just feel so intensely present in those flavors while I'm drawing them. And of course, on table mats. I don't know if I probably have more photos elsewhere. I didn't put any more here. You can kind of see some lettering on the table mat on the left here, but every paper table mat will always be drawn on. So it's not sketchbooks alone. So this was the meal that I was talking about um, going through. Um, I went to this osteria um, in which is this Tuscan food place in Florence. This really sort of traditional place, and I wanted to try many things. So I struck up a conversation with one of the servers there, who then helped me out with half portions of a lot of different dishes, and kept explaining them to me. So then I kept taking notes. And markets, right? So markets are one of my I think markets and stationery shops and supermarkets, those would be my top three favorite city things on day one. um, I would always go to the local vegetable and fruit market, um, always pick up things that I did not know names of or recognize, and then sort of try and figure out what to do with them. And it's amazing. And markets are like a mela, right? Like the more foreign the country to you, the more amazing it is, what you find there. And that's where people are completely off their guard. They're really themselves because they're just shopping for their family. So this picture on the right is of a citron. I had to research and find out what this is. The owner of this tree thought that this was some really useless variety of lemons, but it turned out to be extremely useful. So these are some of the drawings from Japan. Like I said, complete wonderland. These completely unimaginable kinds of food. So, like that, uh, it's exciting for me, at least. I don't know how you feel about it, but when you look at something and you really can't predict what it might taste like or feel like, Japan is all like that. And so I found myself picking up these dry paint markers and watercolors. So I travel with this water brush and this small watercolor kit. regular Winsor Newton, frustratingly bad colors, but it just sort of, you get used to it, I guess. This was Mexico. This thing that they have, this stone thing, it's like a mortar and pestle. It's called a molcajete. These are ice creams in Mexico, and this fermented pineapple drink called tepache. And they have other fermented drinks as well. They're really fascinating. And this is one of the stories that I think I've told often online. Um, this evening, when I was trying desperately to get a reservation at this highly recommended restaurant, and I didn't get a reservation, and I ended up super hungry, and I walked into this really crowded little bar in Florence. And this was on the other side of the river, which is, from the touristy side, it's on the other side. And this was this amazing bar. It turned out to be this really, really nice evening. They were completely, it was filled with Italian people, which most of Florence is not. And they were just having a good time. It was a really good place. Emiliano and Marcella were making open sandwiches. It was like being in someone's home. It was like being, at a kitchen table and being served what you wanted. And I was immediately surrounded by a whole bunch of people talking about me drawing. And a few minutes later, the plate on the top right in my drawing appeared, and they said, "For the artist." And that's a very convenient side effect of drawing in foreign cities as well, especially when you're a single brown girl. You get fed a lot. People, for some reason, tend to think you need more food. This was this, I think I have more about this later. Or maybe I'll tell you about it right now. This was this evening in London when it poured like crazy. Um, yeah, bloody London weather. And I think I had I had some plans that day that didn't work out. I think I was going some outdoor plans, like a graffiti tour or something like that. And I was really annoyed. That's a picture of me from that day. And it was one of the rare days that I needed comfort food. And very, very rare times that I wanted Indian food, which doesn't happen with me very often. But I went to Dishroom in London, and I was sitting at this table. And my favorite thing on this page, guys, I'm not a racist person, but there was this white guy who came and sat down next to me and thought that the plate of samosas I had ordered were for the table, and he ate from it, and I got really annoyed. But I couldn't tell him, of course, we were having a perfectly pleasant conversation, and so I wrote, "Ek gora mere saath baitha, mera samosa kha gaya." So really stream of consciousness, right? This was this graffiti that I saw in a museum bathroom, I think in London. And I felt that it was so apt. It said, "Please feel free to sit in here and cry until you feel ready to function again, then turn your rage into rainbows." And I think I was having one of those days when I needed to hear that. So there's so much of this struggle that starts to find its way in these diaries. Um, Pieces of graffiti, things that you read in different places, and looking back at these always reminds you of what was going on at that time and makes it come back really strongly. And I don't know if you can tell, but I can definitely tell when I'm least self-conscious about how I'm drawing something. It just doesn't matter anymore. It's really, I'm so in that emotion at that time. And so for me, the diaries are that. This drawing on the left was from this photograph. I think this was in Tate, London. It was this photograph of a woman holding up her dress to reveal a bruise. And I felt that it was really, really beautiful. And the drawing on the right um, is this massive catharsis. When I was very sick and alone in Granada in south of Spain, I didn't speak the language. I was very sick. I didn't know what was going on. I was disoriented. Um, and I was just sort of writing. And I find this so funny in hindsight because on the same page, I'm complaining and I'm also sort of trying to pacify myself and saying, I'm grateful, I'll be okay, this will be fine. And so this is really how, you you sort of what I was speaking about earlier, this sense of gratitude and grace. You start to emerge from difficulties while you're traveling alone. And really, this is such a metaphor for life, right? Because you go through something really difficult, you didn't think you could make it. And then it's almost like the universe surprises you with a moment. And if you have the eyes for it, you suddenly realize that you're suddenly experiencing this moment of grace. And what else do you need? And so this pearl of wisdom came out of my head in that moment, which is this thing that I would keep hearing from backpackers, that you expect nothing, that you travel. A traveler travels and expects nothing and doesn't put roots down anywhere. And I felt that you expect nothing and you find everything. This sense of abundance. And there's a lot of these pages when I'm thinking about what it is to respect the flow and let go, and what do you hold on to and what you're not hold on to, etc. And so many thank yous and so much gratitude and grace in certain moments. And you can sort of see that it's uncontained. It's very, very honest in these books. It's most honest in these books, perhaps. This drawing was soon after I'd gone snorkeling for the first time. And a very bad drawing trying to remember it, but it was really, really amazing, and I had to capture it in some way. The moment that I experienced that. These are some drawings of rain, completely different times. This beautiful evening. This is the same friend's wedding vows translated into English. It's called the Saptapadi. This was also in Florence. The drawing on the left is I was at this really beautiful church, and I was hearing this story. I think somebody was telling me about the bell towers and how they have a signature sound, the bell towers of every town in Italy, and how the sound of the bell tower of your town, when you hear that, that is how you know that you are home. And I felt that that was so symbolic. And this was a time when I was really thinking a lot about what home means. And it just felt like this really beautiful message that spoke to me. And on the right is this whole, I was reading so much about the Renaissance again. Of course, I was very moved by the Renaissance as a child, reading about Michelangelo, but while I was in Italy, reading about it there and understanding it was really lovely. And I was reminded of, I think this idea is also in Michelangelo's biography, but I was reminded of this idea of how there was a sense of glorifying God by making what you can do by doing what you can do with your hands instead of bowing down in church. And I felt that that really spoke to me. So this was the concert I was telling you about in Austin, Michele. And churches are built for these amazing concerts. But yeah, so many of these music concerts. This was the drawing on the left was a concerto. I drew it in like, I think, a minute, because my phone didn't have battery in it, and it was this really beautiful moment. The picture on the right is opera in Florence again. The drawing on the left is pipe camp, because we were in Japan for type camp, and the ryokan, which is this sort of style of traditional house that was that hosted us for a lunch one day, made this beautiful calligraphy poster welcoming us. But they were Japanese, and they misspelled type camp as pipe camp. So the rest of the time we kept calling it pipe camp because it was so cute. And the note on the right is what I typically leave for hosts, where of homes that I've stayed at. So a lot of moments of gratitude, which brings me to this idea of collection. um, we draw because we want to collect things, because we want to learn from them, because we want to hold them and remember them later in some way. And this is this is the impulse that brings me, sort of that I draw sketch notes with. I've drawn sketch notes since before I knew they could be called sketch notes. I think it was in NID that drawing and lettering and writing started to all sort of merge together into one whole. And now I know no other way. I just feel like I want to gather the meaning, the feeling, the importance of what I'm learning in that moment as well as I can. So it's almost like what I would call a visual form of journalism, because I'm distilling information that I'm hearing or reading. And I'm trying to make sort of like this visual shortcut for myself to refer to later. And it came as a really amazing surprise to me that other people started to connect with these. And I think this drawing was 2009 or something, and this is from Creative Review magazine that published my Design Yatra sketch notes for 2 consecutive years. And I really found it quite amazing that, I mean, this is when I started to realize that it works as visual journalism for other people as well, as a sort of a shorthand to remember that time or that moment. But for me, it's an impulse. A lot of diaries are filled with these, and there's so many jokes. This was a joke that Vijay and I made about Arvind Kejriwal and a coalition, and the festival is called a coalition. um, there's just, yeah, these nuggets of wisdom. And there's so much that I go back to when I open up these books again. So these books, by the way, I mean, the ones that we are seeing here right now on screen is a Moleskine, a watercolor Moleskine notebook, and that's become one of my go-to formats for some reason. It's very convenient. It's this long format. It goes easily into a bag. This is at the Off Festival in Barcelona. Um, I'm not making this up. This is what Seb Lester's talk was called. These Hellfire Tits. He's amazing. And I think I drew better lettering than him. Don't tell him I said that. So it's drawing these is, I suppose I would draw a parallel to what I was saying about museums. There's this heightened sense of connection with the people that you are listening to and what you're absorbing. And you're really, really bringing your attention wholly to that moment when you're drawing it. Maybe this is another reason that I and so many of us draw, because it keeps us from being distracted and going off tangents in our minds. This was last year, so even from screens, I found that I did the same thing. It's not only when I'm, in fact, I probably need it even more when I'm seeing something on the screen. This was during Type Weekend last year. So by the way, guys, all of these notebooks, like I'm sitting amidst them right now. So maybe once I've gone over all of this, we can see if you would like me to crack some of them open. There's so much information in these. They're like my personal encyclopedia. And so many thoughts that I was having at that moment. Why did I decide to capture a certain idea or the other? And sometimes I think that these are the dots that start to connect later when I'm thinking about work on similar lines or the other. I spoke about catharsis earlier, and we use the word quite often nowadays. This is what it really means to me. In the end, I live and die on the inside of my head. Maybe this is a slightly sad way of saying it. Better way of saying it is that it's the process of releasing and thereby providing relief from strong or repressed emotions. And we all know that diaries and drawing and writing does that for us. And when I was telling you about growing up drawing and preferring that over other things and being addicted to it, I've also had times in my life when I realized that it was when I could not draw anymore that I had hit rock bottom. Like that was my yardstick. I realized that it means so much to me, like breathing almost. And it's in those times that, you know, and these are some of the drawings when I wasn't traveling, but I found myself um, relying on drawing to reassure me, or remind me, or give me direction to move forward. And so the drawing on the right, for example, I drew that after a particularly bad break. And um, I actually use the word the most courageous resistance. Drawing letters on the page might be the most courageous resistance. It means that I might, after all, make it out again. So I think it really is that important to me. And I put this picture on the right from one of my everyday work notebooks. My work notebooks are filled with so much stuff. Uh, Constantly, I'm constantly writing, and every now and then there'll be this moment of honesty or vulnerability, um, because I can't process something, and the only way that I can process it is by writing about it, or writing something or drawing something. The one on the right again was from last year, one of the notebooks. Um, you can see it's a work notebook. It has some work notes, and it also has this sort of self assurance. Sab theek ho jayega. So in the studio, I have this sort of habit, and I try to set it as a tradition of having this stack of A4s on hand at all times. Um, Mostly on every desk surface. I encourage having A4, like loose A4 sheets on hand at all times. And I myself often will pick them up. So these are not sketchbooks, but they are, you know, I have boxes and boxes of these sketches or drawings or ideas. And sometimes they are kind of well, sometimes they are bits and pieces. Sometimes they are things that I was communicating to somebody I needed to put up on a board at that time. So even right now around me, I have this sort of perfect bound stack of paper that is always on a desk, and there are these loose sheets that are always hanging around. Last year, at some point in the first lockdown, I started to draw round hand calligraphy as a almost, again, there's no better word for it, as an almost everyday meditation. Because it's very the structuredness of it, the focus required to draw every letter in that particular way at that particular angle of the pen. Um, in that time, there's no other thought that could fill your head. So you know, it was almost like respite. When the mind was racing, I would find myself at the desk, just, you know, writing or drawing a piece of poetry or a quote that had called to me. So drawing is comfort, and I discovered the world of type and lettering at NID. Um, in hindsight, it seems so inevitable because I've been talking to you about loving words and loving poetry and loving to write, and lettering adds feeling to the meaning of words. And so it just feels so inevitable in hindsight that type became something that I became obsessed with. Um, but while we were at NID, I didn't think much of it at all. We just drew letters because there were like 6 fonts on your computer, and you had to mock up everything by hand. You couldn't take printout. Sorry. And this drawing, I think this was 2007 or 8. I drew this in a blue diary that's sitting next to me here right now. And it became a print, and it found its way to David Gilmour, and he wrote me a letter and saying thank you for it. And it was sort of like this. I couldn't process what had just happened and what did I do and what is this world of lettering. And it became the sort of validation that I needed at that time to start. I started, like I was saying with the sketch notes, I started to realize that something that had meaning for me was also doing something for other people. And so I became the person who drew stories and songs on walls, with chalk, on glass, in entire restaurants that are like a sketchbook that you walked inside of it. So I'm taking the liberty of keeping that, bringing that into this presentation. And can you really say that hands are not sketchbooks or other body parts if that rocks your boat? And I found that other people invited me to draw on other precious things as well. And letters could become other things that connect people. And that we could draw with water on streets because it evaporates. And that is a very popular and regular activity at workshops that I do. And streets are the best sketchbooks because you can be completely honest and it evaporates. And students often write the funniest and the weirdest things. And so it's really, I think thinking back to my childhood again, I think it's really have surface will draw. And so much poetry. Poetry is soulless. Poetry explains things. I've been chatting with another writer of late about poetry, about spiders and how they're so misunderstood. The poem on the left is this beautiful poem about a father and daughter and what hands mean. It's called Hands by Sarah Kay. So a lot of these books, these are just obviously a few drawings, but a lot of books with poems or fragments of songs. And they really bring me back to that moment. And I think that's their meaning or their purpose for me, those pages. It's like, I don't know, like a photo album or something. And these were, so this one was drawn as was this live at this performance in Habitat Center. And so again, like with the travel diaries, these drawings become a way to connect with people with other artists, with the singers or the performers of these things. So expression, right? Like trying to express the feeling or the meaning of words in a certain way. And patience is, there's this quote by Elif Shafak, where it says, patience does not mean to passively endure, it means to be farsighted enough to trust the end result of a process. because time is needed for the crescent moon to become full. And I was thinking about that idea. Somehow the word sabra brings it home for me more than in any other language. And I found myself trying to embroider it very painstakingly into paper because that's also patience. And that led to this artwork on this idea of integrity. Which was embroidered in cloth. This is another performance, this Dastangoi of The Little Prince in Hindi, which is really, really quite interesting, really nice. So quotable. I love The Little Prince. I own the book in many different forms, and the metaphors are so gorgeous. It was quite curious to see them translated, like Mera Phool Meri Zimmedari Hai. So these drawings really feel like elongating that moment for myself, the pleasure of that moment. Sometimes it's apparent gibberish to other people. This says nothing that you would probably make any sense of, but it's a moment or a week in time in a particular place. The drawing on the right is me trying to memorize this Japanese extract from the Buddhist Lotus Sutra. So yeah, loose leaf diaries, if I can take the liberty of calling them sketch notes. Some of you might have seen me posting some of these. I found myself drawing my vegetable shopping lists over the last year, and they've taken quite a shape of their own. So suddenly in the middle of all of my work notebooks, it's sort of like punctuated by these vegetable shopping lists. This is this really amazing, and I'll tell you why it's amazing. This certificate that I was invited to hand that I make for somebody. It's amazing because Beatrice Ward was first or one of the first women at the Type Directors Club. And this scholarship is named after her and awarded to a promising female student every year. And every year they invite a letterer or calligrapher from around the world, a female letterer, to hand make this certificate as a gift for the girl who's going to receive the scholarship. So it's really like this sort of sense of lineage or this sense of, passing forward something. And I'm going to share some of the sketches with you of the development of this thing. I wanted to try and create something that reflects the feeling of that gift. So it's completely, it's handmade, it's tactile in all the ways that I could manage. I tried to see if I could sort of put on my designer hat and make it feel like a certificate, but also have my human being artist hat and make it from me to the girl who's going to get it, Blossom. And I sort of played around with a lot of ways to do that. And then I finally decided to draw the lettering in the same way that I draw my diaries. My diary lettering style is really something that I consider my own and almost like a signature, which I've sort of developed organically over the years. And so I felt that it was very personal. And of course, I hand drew it once the sketches were done, and then I hand embossed it, and I use this gold and just try to make it as tactile as possible so that once it finally was shipped to Blossom, it felt like it had come, it sort of reflected that idea of a personal gift. Similarly, this was drawn for somebody last year as these are her wedding vows um, that I hand lettered on this sheet of paper. And her friend actually requested me to draw this for her as a surprise gift. So she didn't know that she was going to receive it. So this is just a glimpse of the process, but of course, the whole thing is on Instagram. Can you guys see what I was saying about the meditativeness of round hand? So that brings me to work. I was telling you about what I do for a living is design. I work for brands. I design different visual materials, and this habit or this method or this inclination of drawing constantly to make sense of things or to understand the world or to communicate with other people is extremely useful to bring clarity to work. And I would say a couple of things. One is this the sense of clarity, and the other is actually before that the sense of exploration. When we study design process in design school, um, there's typically this sort of early phase of research, of understanding the information about the work that you're going to be doing, crafting your own brief, and then starting to what is often called solve the problem. Um, and for me, maybe it was just the way that I understood it, or I started to feel over the first few years of professional practice that I needed to sort of insert another phase into it. And I think this started to come more and more from that impulse of the travel diaries, of this sense of play, of this sense of um, not uh, not functioning from the logical mind, but inhabiting the intuitive self. Um, and I started to feel like I needed to insert a phase in there. So what I started to do at the studio very consciously is have a phase of learning, of research, of hearing, of taking in information, um, organizing it, writing it down, documenting it, putting it up on boards, etc., in the studio, and then walking away from it, drawing, and not looking at it for a period of time. Um, and often during that time, and I will share some glimpses of those books with you. Um, Often during that time, I draw what you could loosely call mind maps, but I really go off on a walk in my head. Um, of every association, every story, every piece of information I might have heard somewhere, or every experience I might have had, and start to sort of bring it together and start to almost build this world that may or may not have a direct connection with that project, with the problem I'm trying to solve as a designer, as we say it. And I start to ask a lot of what if questions. And I think it was Neville Brody who once said that if he's stuck, one of the things that he would do is ask what this solution would not be. And I think I have this phase of that, of saying, what would this not be? And then I would say, why not? And this sort of an approach, and then I would of course go back to the information and start working on it as a designer should. But this sort of walking away in this phase of almost play has become extremely enriching, and it's become I mean, now I can confidently look back and say that it is a pattern because of the number of times that it has happened with different projects, that has resulted in the most unusual solutions or the most unusual ideas for that particular project, just because there's been this crazy sense of saying, what if we could do that? or why don't we do it another way entirely? So, so those are two things that I will share a little bit of in this section. Firstly, some of the sketches of that piano that I showed you earlier. These are some of the drawings. And this is a vintage, this is the Maharaja's old piano in Narendra Bhavan in Bikaner that was being converted into the centerpiece. So we painted it red and drew the lyrics of one of his favorite songs on it. And this is a quick glimpse of what I was saying about going off on a walk. You might see the connection with the sketch notes, and really find strange sort of tangents of information in a lot of these pages. So it's like I have a phase of taking in information, then a phase of expanding it as much as I can, and then a phase of eliminating whatever can be eliminated and organizing. And that really takes faith. And I think that sense of faith and courage comes from the experiences of the travel diaries. Because at that time, when you are commissioned to work on something in a certain way, to think of something that's completely different is a very abstract and a very scary idea. But it's just sort of I've developed that confidence, I think, over the years. And this is an example of just communicating with the drawings. The drawing on the right hand side is in Chennapatna, communicating with a girl who didn't speak the same language, but just the fact that you can draw starts to help to bring those ideas together. These are early sketches from a project for an alternative library in Bangalore that's called Champaka. And here it's in our conversations, we started to speak a lot about the joy of reading and how it should be accessible by everyone, just like nature's abundance. And it sort of thinking of a library almost like a forest. And slowly that idea started to cement, and it actually became the seed of the final logo. Similarly, the brainstorming for this hospital in Bombay. And often, like you can see on the picture on the left, it's very useful to be able to draw ideas very quickly and workshop them with clients. Make these mind maps on the fly, start to help to make connections. And then it started to come together into the logo. I've been able to insert illustration and work with illustration in a strategic way on so many projects because of that process of sort of taking a different route completely. So those sketches became these large illustrations, which we then applied on spaces. And again, this project is a larger case study that's not for the space, but just trying to draw a parallel and explain how lateral thinking really works, and how I wouldn't be able to think laterally if it weren't for being able to draw. Because it's when you draw that I think that muscle memory and the body takes over, that you're not really, you're sort of forcing yourself out of the logical brain. So a lot of my diaries, a lot of my work diaries are hand-drawn like this. All of my work diaries are hand-drawn like this. I'm saying this as I'm looking at a stack of them next to me that I pulled out from the shelves. So this, for example, was this particular page was I think it was a font test. And just because we needed some dummy text, I started to write things that, if in a hospital, different departments were saying things to you, what would those things be? And it ended up becoming something that we actually used in the spaces because it felt so nice and so warm that you go to a hospital and it speaks to you. Um, so just another example of how these surprises sort of pop out of the sketchbooks. This was a restaurant in Delhi called the Hungry Monkey. And when this restaurant was named, they had a completely different and a very abstract reason for naming it the Hungry Monkey. But what we did is interpreted hungry as curious and monkey as adventure. So curiosity is the beginning of adventure, became a sort of a story that we designed for this space. And that idea then started to lead into different directions. What would feel like curiosity and adventure on a constant basis? And this project happened just when I had come back from Mexico and looked at all of these fantastical drawings of creatures. And those drawings started to find their way into this project. And we made it, we really sort of imagined this space as this sense of um, constant curiosity and excitement that you would experience. So we sort of came up with this idea of what we call the unwords, that it's unserious, unbound. This was a color palette, and all of these fantasy illustrations then started to get applied onto all of the surfaces in this space, on backdrops, etched in glass, embedded in the floor, on concrete tables. So it's really how you kind of think of these absolutely unusual or ideas that you could not have predicted before because you've allowed yourself to wander. This is a restaurant in Bombay called Americano, and this is just sharing a few process sketches with you of how the identity was drawn. The idea in the studio, I worked on this with Quick Brown Fox Design last year, and the idea of this was to think about, so Americano is in Kala Ghoda, which is the art district, and we thought about how artists' signatures have that whimsical quality that we wanted to capture. This is one of the early sketches for the gin that we worked on called Terai. And we were inspired by the old coins in British India, and they were interpreted as the botanicals in our gin. So we tried to draw them in that sort of a style, which is sort of British and Indian at the same time. It could be sort of like an Indian Mughal artist trying to draw British botanicals. And then that became embossed on the label of the rye in this way. And I think that this, the reason that I thought about sharing this project with you is not only because of the process of the illustration, but also the fact that we ended up designing the bottle in the studio. And it's really interesting how that happened, because we, for the longest time, were just playing with drawings and with the assumption that at some point a product designer would come in and design the bottle. And before we knew it, one foot in front of the other, we learned about glass making, and we kept solving one problem after another and ended up designing a glass bottle ourselves. And this really started as loose sketches in the studio and just thoughts and ideas with a very supportive and fun to work with client. And the same way with the Channapatna tops, with the closures that we designed. We literally walked around the studio and kept putting different objects on top of the bottle and thinking about how we could cap it with something interesting, and one what if question after another, and just came upon this completely new way of looking at the craft. And I think this is the last project, just to show you a glimpse. Again, this is on Instagram, and it's really not the scope of this particular conversation. But we ended up being really fortunate to be shortlisted to work on these installations at ISRO, at the Indian Space Research Organization's Delhi headquarters. And this project was finished miraculously just a few days before lockdown happened last year. And it was really similar to what I was describing with the process at the RAI. You just start with a drawing, and then one step after another, one friend and another friend, and then you don't know how, but these paths sort of start opening up in front of you, and it just all really starts with a dream. And this sculpture, I lovingly called her Aisha, really started as this fantasy, this sort of dream of a little 8-year-old girl standing in the middle of this building in the atrium, pointing up at this constellation of stars with this confidence that this organization brings to the children of this country now, that it is now possible for them to dream of reaching the stars. And it really started off with this very sort of abstract idea, and so, by the way, did this, which is the actual constellation installation that we created. And guys, we are graphic designers. We usually work in millimeters. This is 6 floors tall. And it's really unbelievable to me even now that we managed to pull off something like this, of course, with the support of so many friends and specialized people that we're fortunate to collaborate with. But it really starts with these crazy ideas and these dreams and these drawings in these books. And I just, before I stop talking for a moment and invite you guys to share and take this chat forward wherever it will, I just sort of wanted to spend a moment talking about how it's so important to collect all of these dots. It's so important to have so many different interests to become genuinely interested in so many things around us. Possibly, if I can be so bold as to say, without bias, without prejudice, without pre-deciding what we might like or not like. That sense of, I mean, what we started off calling curiosity in the beginning. It's so important to be a sponge for experiences without judgment. Because the more that you are interested in, the more that you end up taking in and processing, the more that you have to give out. And I really feel that the last year has not been, I think the biggest difficulty of the last year being isolated has been this dearth of having more to take in. and and that's why so many of us have experienced what we call a creative block or a slump. It's not because we don't have things within us anymore. It's because we have such a dearth of things that we can experience or touch or learn. And if only we could focus on that much more, if one way or another we could focus on um, just absorbing how much ever we can from this time and drawing it, um, you know we might make our way through gentler and kinder and richer human beings at some point. That's a very big statement. I did not mean to make a very big statement to close. I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here.